I want to start by saying I never asked to be caught. Nobody does. The story I'm about to tell you began in the most ordinary of afternoons, the kind that doesn't even register as a memory until years later, when you realize it was actually the hinge on which everything turned. I was 16. My mother had just come home from a long shift at the hospital where she worked as a pediatric nurse. The house was quiet. I thought I had at least another hour before anyone would notice I was even home from school, let alone gone from my room. I thought the door was locked. I thought the dress was just something I was trying on, the way a kid tries on a Halloween costume in July just to see what it feels like. I thought I was alone. I wasn't. And what happened next broke something inside me that maybe had needed breaking for a very long time. Let me back up a little because if I don't, none of this will make sense. I grew up in a small town in the Midwest where my father worked at the post office and my mother worked nights and weekends at Mercy Hospital. We were a quiet family. We ate dinner together most nights. We went to church on Sundays even though nobody in my house ever seemed particularly moved by the hymns, and I had a younger brother named Daniel, who was 2 years younger than me and had the kind of easy, uncomplicated relationship with his body that I never seemed to have. I mean that literally. From the time I was small, I felt like I was wearing the wrong costume. When Daniel ran around shirtless in the yard in summer, I wanted desperately to do the same, but instead of feeling free, I'd feel this strange prickling sensation, like I was being watched and judged by some invisible panel that I could never quite please. I didn't have the words for it back then. I'd look in the mirror at my bedroom door after a shower and feel like the reflection staring back was somebody else's idea of me. Somebody had drawn a person, and I was just standing inside their drawing, trying not to wrinkle the paper. The first time I ever put on something feminine, I was 13. It was a soft lavender scarf of my mother's that I found folded on the dresser in her closet. I don't remember why I picked it up. Maybe because it smelled like her perfume, and I missed her when she was working. Maybe because lavender was the color of the curtains in the room where my grandmother had died, and I associated it with something safe and old and comfortable. I wrapped it around my neck and stood in front of the full-length mirror that hung on the back of her closet door, and for a moment, a single quiet moment, the feeling of standing inside someone else's drawing went away. Something clicked. Something shifted. I remember thinking, oh, there you are. I remember thinking it felt like finding a word you'd been looking for all day, but couldn't quite remember. Lavender became my color after that, even though I didn't know it yet, as part of any kind of pattern. I just knew I felt less like I was wearing someone else's face when there was something soft around my neck. By 14, I had expanded the experiment. I found an old satin slip of my mother's in the back of a drawer, the kind women used to wear under their dresses in the old days, and I tried it on, just to see. I stood in front of the same mirror, and I felt more of that clicking sensation, that settling, that feeling of being less wrong. I started to understand that something was happening inside me that I couldn't explain and couldn't undo. I researched on the family's shared laptop when my parents were asleep, late at night with the brightness turned all the way down, and I found words like crossdressing, like gender dysphoria, like transgender. I read stories of other people who felt like I felt. Some of those stories were sad ones, with endings that scared me. Some of them were triumphant ones, with people who transitioned and lived their lives as the gender they knew themselves to be. I read about parents who kicked their kids out and parents who embraced them. I read about grown adults who had known since they were 6 years old. I read about people who figured it out at 60. I read until my eyes burned. I never told anybody. I told myself I would, eventually, when I understood it better. I told myself the slip thing was just a phase, the way that being obsessed with dinosaurs is a phase, or that thing I went through with collecting rocks in 3rd grade. I told myself that the more I read online, the more I was probably just confirming a bias I was building in myself. I told myself a lot of things that weren't true. I told myself those things because the alternative was so much harder. The alternative meant that the body I'd been given, the one I was supposed to grow into, the one that my aunt said was such a handsome young man at family gatherings, that body might not be the one I was supposed to live in. And that was terrifying. Terrifying in a way that I couldn't name yet. When I was 15, I started buying my own things very carefully. I had a small allowance and a part-time job bagging groceries at the IGA on weekends, and I squirreled money away in a sock drawer in my bedroom. I'd order things from thrift stores online with prepaid Visa cards I bought at the gas station. A blouse here, a skirt there, 2 pairs of tights, a pair of flats from a place that didn't ask questions. I learned which packages came in unmarked brown boxes. I learned that the mail carrier on our street, Mrs. Henderson, was the kind of older woman who didn't really snoop through people's deliveries. I learned to plan around my mother's schedule. I learned that the laundry room was a dangerous place to leave evidence, because my mother always sorted the clothes. I learned to keep what I had in a small duffel bag under my bed, tucked behind an old sleeping bag we never used. None of this felt nefarious to me. It felt like protecting something precious. Like keeping a stray kitten hidden in the garage. Like having a secret friend. I would wait until everyone was asleep or out of the house, and then I'd quietly take out 1 or 2 items, lock the bedroom door, and stand in front of the mirror. Sometimes I'd just look at myself. Sometimes I'd sit on the edge of the bed and let myself breathe inside the fabric. It wasn't erotic, not really. It was more like emotional. It was like finally exhaling. By the time I turned 16, in the spring of my sophomore year of high school, I had more than a dozen items hidden under my bed. I had my mother's old slip from when I was 13. I had a soft cream-colored blouse with pulley buttons that I'd found at a church rummage sale for $2. I had a navy blue skirt that fell just below my knees and made my legs look long and graceful in a way I'd never felt about my own legs. I had a pair of heels, low ones, that I'd practiced walking in at night in our carpeted hallway, my hand on the wall for balance. I had a little tin of lip balm that I sometimes patted on my cheeks to give them a faint pink. I had a wig, a cheap one, that looked a little like my mother in her younger years with the photos I'd seen. I had built a whole little life for myself in those secret moments. Her name, the name I gave her, the person I became when I put those things on was Elsa. Elsa was a quiet, soft-spoken young woman who helped at her grandmother's bakery and liked long walks in the rain. Elsa was the me that fit. She was what I saw when I finally stopped forcing myself to look at strangers in the mirror. My mother, of course, had no idea. Or so I thought. Looking back, I think parents always know more than we credit them for. I think mothers especially have a sense for things their children are carrying that the children themselves can't see. But I'll get to that. The afternoon in question was a Tuesday in early October. The trees had just started turning, and the light coming in through the kitchen windows had that particular slant that felt like a held breath. Daniel was at a friend's house for a study group. My father was on a long-haul delivery route. He'd be back late that night. My mother had texted at around 2 in the afternoon to say she was going to be late at work, that a kid in the pediatric ward was having a rough night, and she wanted to stay with him. She'd said she'd probably be home around 7. I had the whole house to myself. Or so I thought. I got home from school at about 3:15. I dropped my backpack by the front door. I made myself a snack. A bowl of cereal. Nothing elaborate. I went upstairs. I locked my bedroom door out of habit. I sat on my bed for a few minutes. I thought about doing homework. I thought about watching something on my phone. I thought about going outside. I thought about how the light was so pretty and how I never had time alone like this, and how I'd been wanting to put on the blue skirt for a few days. I told myself I'd only do it for 15 minutes. I told myself I'd just look, and then I'd take it off. I told myself I'd already done this 100 times, and nothing had ever gone wrong. So I pulled out the duffel bag. I pulled out the navy blue skirt with a soft waistband. I pulled out the cream-colored blouse with the pulley buttons. I pulled out the tights, the flats, the wig. I even pulled out that old lavender scarf, which I'd been keeping all this time because lavender still felt like a small kind of prayer. I undressed quickly, the way you undress when you're doing something you know you're not supposed to be doing. I pulled the tights on first. I stepped into the skirt. I buttoned the blouse. I slipped my feet into the flats. I tucked my real hair up under the wig, smoothing the bangs down over my forehead. I patted a little of the lip balm onto my cheeks. I looked in my mirror, the small one that sat on my dresser, and turned to check the back of the skirt. I looked briefly, like Elsa. I felt that click. That settling. That there you are feeling that I haven't been able to adequately describe to anyone, ever, in any language I've tried. I was so absorbed in looking at myself, adjusting the wig slightly, smoothing the blouse over the skirt's waistband, that I didn't hear the garage door opening downstairs. I didn't hear the kitchen door. I didn't hear the footsteps on the stairs. I didn't hear my mother's soft knock at the bedroom door, the kind she gave when she was checking in, the 2 quick taps that said, "I'm here, are you decent?" I didn't hear her voice, muffled through the wood, saying my name, then my name again, a little more careful. What I did hear, all of a sudden, was the lock turning, the lock that I had just convinced myself was locked, and the door swinging open, and my mother standing in the doorway, still in her scrubs from the hospital, her hospital badge swinging from a lanyard around her neck, a tote bag of laundry folded over one arm because she decided to come home early to switch out her wardrobe before her next shift, holding her keys in her other hand, looking at me. I cannot overstate the feeling of being caught. The panic that ran through me was total. It was molecular. Every cell of my body fired at once with a single, urgent command to disappear, to not be seen, to not exist in this moment. I had imagined this moment in my head 100 times, and in every imagined version, my mother's face had changed to something terrible. Disgust, horror, anger, disappointment. In my head, she was always going to look at me like I was a stranger who had broken into her house. In my head, she was going to scream or cry or call my father immediately or call the pastor from church or call the police. In my head, this was the moment my life ended. She didn't do any of those things. She stood in the doorway for what felt like an entire lifetime, just looking at me. Her face was unreadable. She didn't move. She didn't say anything. She didn't come in. She didn't back out. She just stood there, and I stood there, and the afternoon light was slanting in through the window behind me, and the room was very quiet. I could hear the refrigerator humming downstairs. I could hear the leaves outside the bedroom window, the ones still on the trees. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. Then, slowly, my mother set down the tote bag of laundry on the floor, just inside the door. She stepped into the room, still not saying anything, and she closed the door behind her with a soft click. She turned the lock again the way I'd turned it, and she stood with her back against the closed door for a moment, just breathing, just looking at me. I was crying, I realized only later. I was crying without making any noise. The tears were just running down my face, and I didn't even feel them. My mother said my name. Not my real name, the one I was called at school and on sports teams and at family gatherings. She said my name really softly, like a question, like she was checking if I was still in there. I nodded. She nodded back. Then she did the most unexpected thing of my entire life up to that point. She said, in a voice that I cannot recreate, but that I can still hear clearly if I close my eyes, "Oh, baby, there you are. There you are." Those 3 words cracked something wide open in me. Those 3 words, more than anything anyone had ever said to me, told me that I was real. That this version of myself was real. That Elsa was real. That whoever I had been trying to be every other minute of every other day was the costume, and this version was the person who had been there all along, just hiding under the rug. My mother had been a pediatric nurse for 18 years. She had seen sick children and scared children and dying children and brave children and children in the middle of becoming themselves. She had seen children's faces when their parents walked into the room, both when the parents were kind and when the parents were not. She had watched parents react to their children's truths in ways small and large, and she had decided, years before that Tuesday in October, that she would never be the parent who made her child's truth into a wound. She had watched my face, in the doorway, before she said what she said. She had watched my body language. She had seen that I was terrified, and she had seen, somewhere underneath the terror, the truth. "Baby," she said, "I want to talk to you. Can I sit down?" She gestured to the desk chair in the corner of my room. I nodded again because I couldn't speak. She pulled a chair out and she sat down across from me, with the door still closed behind her, and we looked at each other. I have never, in my whole life, felt so exposed and so safe at the same time. It was the strangest, most contradictory feeling I have ever had, and I've had it again and again since, but that first time is the one I keep returning to. She didn't ask me if I was confused. She didn't ask me if I was doing this for attention. She didn't ask me how long or why or whether I was being influenced by the internet. She didn't ask me whether I was sure. She asked me instead, "How long have you been feeling this way?" And I told her. I told her about the lavender scarf when I was 13. I told her about the slip. I told her about the online research. I told her about the small duffel bag under the bed. I told her about Elsa. I told her about the click, the settling feeling, the "oh, there you are" of it. I told her everything. It came out in a rush, the way a confession comes out when you've been carrying it for years and finally have permission. She listened. She did not interrupt. When I was finished, she was quiet for a long time, just looking at the face of the person she had helped make, sitting in front of her in a navy blue skirt with a cream-colored blouse. She said very calmly, "Thank you for telling me. I know that wasn't easy." She said, "I want you to know that I love you. Whatever this is, I love you." She said, "I have questions and I'm going to ask them gently, and I want you to answer if you want to, and if you don't want to, I want you to tell me that too." She said all of this in the voice she used at the hospital when she was talking to a frightened kid, a voice that was steady and patient and not going anywhere. I nodded. Her first question was, "Do you want to be a girl?" That was a question I had been asked by myself, in my own head, every single day for years. I had beaten myself up over that question. I had told myself every time that it was a stupid question, that I was just a weird kid, that it was a phase, that I was broken. But when my mother asked it, calmly, sitting in the desk chair, her hands folded in her lap, her hospital scrubs smelling faintly of antiseptic, something in me let the question land honestly for the first time. I said yes. I said, "Yes, I want to be a girl. I think I might be a girl." My mother nodded. She did not look surprised. She said, "Okay, thank you for telling me that." Her second question was, "Have you felt this way for a long time?" And I said, "As long as I can remember." She nodded again. She said, "And when you put on this skirt, this blouse, this wig, you feel what?" I thought about it. I said, "I feel like me. I feel like I've been wearing someone else's costume, and this is the costume that fits. I feel like I can breathe." My mother's eyes filled up. Not with pity, not with horror, just with a kind of recognition. She said, "Baby, I have seen this before. Not in my own child, until today, but in other people's children. I've seen kids and parents come into the hospital, and I have seen parents who made their kids feel small for who they were, and I have seen parents who held their kids up and helped them become who they were. I have decided a long time ago that I want to be the second kind. I want to be the kind of parent that you can come to. I want to be the kind of parent that doesn't make you afraid of yourself. I want to be the kind of parent that, when you need me, I am here." She paused, and then she said, "I'm so glad you didn't go any longer thinking you had to hide this from me." I started crying again. Harder this time. She got up from the desk chair, and she crossed the room, and she sat beside me on the edge of the bed, and she put her arm around me. I leaned into her. The wig I was wearing was itchy and uneven, and I could feel the edge of it under my chin, and I knew I must have looked ridiculous, like a kid playing dress-up in her mother's closet. But she didn't treat me like that. She treated me like someone she was meeting for the first time, someone who had always been there, that she just hadn't properly seen. She treated me like someone worth knowing. She told me, that first afternoon, that she wanted to take things slowly. She said there was no rush. She said that what was important first was for me to feel safe in our home. She said she did not want to tell my father yet because she wanted to talk to him first, gently, to prepare him. She said I should keep doing what I had been doing, coming home, locking my door, taking out the duffel bag, putting on the things, sitting with Elsa, but that now I didn't have to be afraid of being caught. She said she would knock from now on, and that the door lock thing was a habit she was going to respect. She said I didn't have to hide anything anymore, not from her, not ever again. She said, "You can leave the door unlocked, if you want, just so you don't feel like you're locked in. That feels important to me, that you don't feel like you're locked in." I looked at her, and I said, "Are you sure?" She said, "I'm sure. It's your room. It's your home. You should feel safe here. You're always safe here with me." I left the door unlocked from that night on. I stopped putting the duffel bag under the bed. I started leaving some of the clothing items in the regular drawers of my dresser, in between the jeans and the t-shirts, like they were always there. The wig went on a stand on the dresser, beside a regular baseball cap. The lavender scarf was draped over the corner of the mirror. Over the next few weeks, my mother did something extraordinary. She didn't make a big fuss. She didn't sit me down for daily lectures. She didn't make it a project. She read books, I think, on her own time. She talked to colleagues at the hospital, pediatric specialists, and counselors she trusted. She did her homework quietly, and she came to me every couple of days, and she gently asked questions. What did I want to be called? What pronouns felt right? What name did I see for myself? Did I want to see a doctor or a counselor? Did I want her to do anything specific? I told her my name. I told her I wanted to be called Elsa. I told her that I thought of her, of this version of me, as Elsa. She wrote the name down in a small notebook she kept in her purse. She didn't fuss over it. She just nodded, and from that point on, every now and then, she would call me Elsa at home, in a whisper, with that small smile of hers. As if we were co-conspirators in something gentle and important, and a little bit miraculous. She asked me what pronouns I wanted to use, and I told her she/her. She nodded. She said, "Okay, let's take this slow. I'll use them when we're home. When we're out in the world, we'll figure that out in steps. I want you to be safe." She called me her in small ways first. She started referring to me in the third person when we were alone. Elsa left her shoes by the door, or Elsa would like some hot chocolate, I think. She made a point of saying her and she, those little pronouns, even when nobody else was listening, because she had read that language matters, that it helps the brain settle into its own truth, that it is a kind of medicine. My father eventually was told. I wasn't in the room for that conversation. I was upstairs in my room, with the door unlocked, sitting on my bed in the navy blue skirt and the lavender scarf, listening to the muffled sound of my parents' voices through the floor. I could hear the rise and fall of my mother's voice, calm and patient. I could hear my father's voice, lower, harder to make out. The conversation went on for a long time. I sat there listening to it, holding the scarf in my hands, terrified that at any moment my father's heavy footsteps were going to come up the stairs, and the conversation I imagined would happen, the yelling, the disbelief, would begin. None of that happened. After a while, the conversation got quieter. Then it stopped. My mother came up to my room that night and sat beside me on the bed. She said, "He knows. He loves you. It's going to take him a while. Be patient with him. He's a little lost, but he's coming around." She paused. "He's a good man. He's just a little scared. He's never had to think about any of this before. He needs some time." She put her arm around me. "Do you want to give him a hug tonight?" I said no, not tonight. She said that was okay. The next few months, my father was quiet. He wasn't cruel, he wasn't distant, but he was adjusting. He didn't use the name Elsa or the pronouns she and her. He called me by my old name and used he and him, and I could live with that for now because I knew it was going to take time. My mother kept the conversation going at home, kept the doors open, kept inviting my father to ask questions of me, to come to appointments my mother had scheduled for me with a counselor who specialized in gender-diverse youth, to read the books she had stacked on the kitchen table. Slowly, my father began to come around. He wasn't as expressive about it as my mother, but I could see the way he looked at me when I came down the stairs in the morning, in a blouse and skirt, the way the muscles of his face would twitch as he was trying to make himself seen, and I could feel him trying. One day, out of nowhere, in the kitchen over breakfast, he said, "You look nice today, sweetheart." He hadn't ever called me sweetheart before. He had called me sport or buddy or kiddo. He had never used a softer word. He was visibly nervous saying it. He didn't make eye contact, but he said it. I cried at the kitchen table that morning. My father looked like he didn't know what to do. He looked at my mother. She just said, "It's okay, honey. Let her cry. Let her feel what she's feeling." She used the word she. She didn't make a fuss about it. She just used it, naturally, the way she had started using it at home, as if it had always been the word. The counselor was a kind woman named Dr. Marquez, who had a soft face and gently calloused hands and a habit of tilting her head when she listened to you, the way a bird does. She met with me once a week for an hour, and she helped me untangle a lot of the things I had knotted up inside myself around being Elsa, around whether I was really trans, around whether this was a choice or something more essential than a choice. She helped me to understand that gender identity is a deep, internal sense of self, and that the costume is not the costume. The costume is just an external thing that helps the body show the world who it always was. She helped me to understand that I didn't have to decide everything at once. She helped me to understand that I could transition in my own time, in my own way, with small steps or bigger steps, and that what mattered was that I felt myself moving toward myself, rather than away. My mother took me shopping for new clothes. Properly this time. Not the thrift store on a hidden prepaid card. Not the duffel bag under the bed. We went to the mall together on a Saturday, just the two of us, and she took me to the stores she liked, and she told the salespeople quietly that her daughter would like to try some things on. The word daughter in her mouth sounded completely natural. Her daughter. I tried on jeans, blouses, sweaters, a couple of dresses. I stood in fitting rooms with my mother sitting outside, and we talked through the door about what felt good and what didn't. We bought a few things, a soft pair of jeans and a couple of blouses and a green dress with a small floral print that I loved immediately, the way I had loved the navy skirt, immediately, like it had been waiting for me. My mother carried the bags. She paid with her own card. She didn't make a spectacle of it. She just took me shopping for clothes like parents do with their kids, and that was that. I started going out of the house as Elsa, in small ways at first. I went to the grocery store with my mother on Sunday mornings. I went to the library. I drove us to the pharmacy to pick up her prescriptions. I got looks from strangers, sometimes confused looks, double takes, the occasional hard stare from an older woman. My mother noticed the stares. She would not let them pass without acknowledgement. Once in the pharmacy, an older man made a snide comment under his breath to his wife about people like that these days, and my mother turned around and said, very calmly, very clearly, "Excuse me, that's my daughter you're talking about." The man looked like he had been slapped. His wife pulled him away by the sleeve. I went back to high school in the fall of my junior year, after a long summer of slow changes. I had legally changed my name with the help of a lawyer my mother had consulted. I had my school records updated. I had talked with Dr. Marquez to the school counselor and to my teachers about who I was and what my pronouns were and what my name was now. My mother had walked me into school on the first day. She had walked me to the front office. She had introduced me to the principal as Elsa. Her daughter, Elsa. Her daughter, who was going to be a junior this year, who was a good student, who loved reading and biology, and was also on the school newspaper. The principal, a tired-looking man with thin hair and a kind smile, shook my hand and said, "Welcome back, Elsa." It wasn't easy. There were kids at school who made comments. There were parents of other kids who made comments. There were teachers who weren't sure what to call me and adjusted slowly, and sometimes forgot and corrected themselves, and sometimes didn't. There were days when I cried in the bathroom between classes. There were days when the stairs in the hallway felt like they went through me, like lasers. There were days when I wished I could just disappear. My mother was there through all of it. She called the school when things got out of hand. She came in for conferences. She drove me to and from school for a while when I didn't feel safe on the bus. She reminded me every night that she loved me, that she was proud of me, that I was her daughter. Every single night. By senior year, things had settled into a new normal. I had friend groups that included other trans girls and a lot of supportive cis kids. I had a girlfriend, a beautiful girl named Marianne who was on the debate team and who had a soft laugh and who told me on our third date in a coffee shop after school one afternoon that she had known I was trans since the first day she met me and that she was glad I was me and that I was the kindest person she had ever met. I almost dropped my coffee. I had never been told something that mattered so much by someone my own age in that matter-of-fact way. I started to feel for the first time that my life was really beginning. My mother was there for all of it, but not in a smothering way. She let me lead. She let me set the pace. She was the scaffolding, not the building. When I needed her, she was there, and when I didn't need her, she gave me space. She didn't make my transition about her. She didn't make it about her own journey of acceptance, Even though she has told me in quiet moments that it was its own kind of journey for her too, that she had a lot to learn, that she had to unlearn a lot of things, that she had moments of fear and uncertainty like any parent would. She told me these things when I was much older, in college, when I came home for a weekend and we sat on the porch together in the late afternoon light, and she told me gently that she remembered the afternoon. She caught me very clearly, that she often thought about it, that she sometimes wished she had seen it sooner, that she sometimes thought about all the years she had missed being able to tell me that she loved me for who I actually was. I told her not to feel that way. I told her she had been exactly what I needed when I needed her. I told her she had been perfect. The afternoon she caught me in the dress, that Tuesday in October when I was 16, became a kind of family legend. We don't talk about it every day. We don't reference it in some big dramatic way. But it's there, in the background, like a song you only hear when the house is quiet. It's a story of how a mother and a child found each other again, in the middle of the most ordinary afternoon, when the light was slanting in through the kitchen windows and the leaves were turning, and there was a knock at the door. It's a story of how a coincidence and a door that wasn't locked the way it should have been ended up being a small miracle. It's a story of how a mother, with 3 quiet words, "There you are," told her child that she was real. There is so much more to this story now, so many pages I could fill, with the small moments and the big moments, the classroom dramas and the family dinners and the holidays and the graduations, and the first time I wore a formal dress to a school dance. There is the time Marianne's parents met my mother for the first time and were nervous about it, and my mother put them at ease by being exactly who she was: kind, warm, prepared, with a dozen questions ready about how their daughter was doing in school and a plate of homemade brownies under one arm. There is the time I went home from college for Thanksgiving, and my father called me sweetheart again, out of nowhere, the second time ever, and this time he made eye contact. There is the time my brother Daniel, who is now 20 and in his second year of college, called me his sister for the first time on the phone one night, casual as anything, as if it had always been the case, and how much that small word meant to me. There is the time Dr. Marquez, after I graduated from high school, gave me a hug at our last session and told me she was proud of me, and how much that mattered, because she had seen me at the very start of all this, when I was still untangling myself from the worst of it. There are so many afternoons now in my life that feel like that first October afternoon. Quiet, unhurried, full of light. Sometimes I get home from work in the early evening and I lock the door behind me, but I don't feel the same way about the lock. The door being locked is just a habit now. It's not a fear. When I hang up my coat, I see my mother in the framed picture on the wall by the door. She has gray in her hair now. She's retired from the hospital. She volunteers at a clinic that serves trans youth, and she is one of those gentle, fierce grown-ups that kids come out to in her office and trust with their truths. She's the parent she always wanted to be, but that doesn't belong just to me anymore. It belongs to dozens and dozens of kids in our small town. That makes me proud of her in a way that I don't have the words for. I think maybe that's what it means to be someone's child. To make them more of the person they were always trying to be. So if you are reading this, if you are somewhere in the middle of your own quiet October afternoon with the leaves turning outside your window and the light slanting in, and you have a duffel bag somewhere that you don't want anyone to find, and you have a name that you whisper to yourself in the mirror, I want you to know that there is at least one mother out there in the world who knows what she would say if she caught you. She would say, "There you are." She would say, "I love you." She would say, "I'm not going anywhere." And from that moment on, even if everything else in the world is hard and full of stairs and uncertainty, even if there are days when you don't want to leave your room, even if there are people who make you feel small, you would have at least one person in your life who sees you, who has always seen you, who just needed the door to be unlocked to say so. That, more than anything else, is what happened to me that day. The door was supposed to be locked. It wasn't. My mother came in. She saw me. And she told me, in 3 quiet words, that I was real, and it was permanent. Not because she made it permanent in any big dramatic way, not because she signed a piece of paper or bought me a piece of clothing or called a lawyer or scheduled an appointment, but because from that moment on for the rest of my life, I knew that I was seen. I knew that I was loved exactly as I was. I knew that whoever I was becoming, Elsa, or whoever Elsa becomes next, whoever I am in 10 years or 20 years, whoever I am when my hair is finally long enough to wear the way I want it and my closet is full of the colors I love best. I knew I was not alone in becoming her. I had my mother. I had my father, eventually. I had Daniel. I had Marianne. And through her, I had her family. I had Dr. Marquez, and through her a whole network of people who made it their work to help kids like me become themselves. I had the school counselor and a couple of teachers, and a friend or two who stood by me the whole time. But I had my mother first. I had my mother at the very start. I don't know why I'm telling this story now, except that I think stories about doors not being locked when they're supposed to be is a kind of love letter. I think stories about mothers who say, "There you are," to their frightened children are some of the most important stories we have. I think stories about kids in duffel bags under beds, in skirts and cream-color blouses with pearly buttons, with names they whisper in mirrors, are stories that need to be told loudly and clearly and without apology so that other kids in duffel bags can know that there are mothers like mine out there. I have thought a lot in the years since that Tuesday about how easily that afternoon could have gone a different way. I've thought about the other versions of my mother, the imaginary ones, the ones my fear conjured up in the years before. The mother who screamed. The mother who called my father. The mother who sent me to conversion therapy. The mother who kicked me out. The mother who told me I was broken. I have thought about those imagined mothers, and I have felt, for the kids who actually had those mothers, that deep sorrow that I cannot speak about without tearing up even now, years later. I have thought about the kids who didn't get a "there you are." I have thought about what their lives must have been like. I have wished I could go back in time and be their mother for an afternoon. Just one afternoon. A single quiet October afternoon with the door unlocked, so they could know what it felt like to be seen. But I can only be myself. I can only tell my own story. So I'm telling my own story. I'm telling the story of how a mother who worked the night shift to the pediatric ward came home on a Tuesday afternoon in October and caught her child in a dress and said, "There you are," and meant it. I'm telling the story of how she didn't make a fuss, but she made it permanent, slowly, gently, by being the kind of parent who reads books and asks gentle questions and uses new pronouns in her whisper at the breakfast table and takes her daughter shopping at the mall on a Saturday. I'm telling the story of how she didn't fix me, because I wasn't broken. I'm telling the story of how she let me become myself, fully, completely, with all the small steps and the big steps and the bumps and the setbacks and the moments of joy and the moments of grief. I'm telling the story of how a love letter, the kind you write with how you treat your child, can be the most permanent thing in the world. If you are a parent reading this and you have a child who is hiding a bag under the bed, who is locking their door, who is whispering a name to themselves in the mirror, who is afraid of being seen, please consider being my mother for one afternoon. Please consider saying, "There you are," when you finally see them. Please consider not making a fuss. Please consider being the parent who, when their child comes out, doesn't make it about them. Please consider being the parent who reads the books and asks the gentle questions and uses the new pronouns in a whisper and takes their kid shopping on a Saturday and walks them into school on the first day and introduces them by their name. Please consider being the parent who lets the child lead, who holds them when they cry, who backs off when they need space, who shows up when they need to be shown up for. Please consider being the kind of parent that your child will remember in their own quiet October afternoon when the leaves are turning and the light is slanting in and they're finally home from a long day at work and the door is locked behind them and they don't feel afraid of locks anymore. If you are a kid reading this, who is still in the middle of your own story, who is still whispering your name in the mirror, who is still hiding a bag under the bed, please stay alive. Please stay alive long enough to find your own mother, your own door, your own "there you are." Please stay alive long enough to know that what is waiting for you is not the worst thing you can imagine. Please stay alive long enough to know that there are mothers out there who will catch you in a dress and say the words you have been waiting to hear. Please stay alive long enough to know that, somewhere in the world, there is at least one mother for you, and she might be your actual mother, or she might be a counselor, or a doctor, or a teacher, or a friend, or a stranger on the internet, or a friend of a friend, or a community center worker, or a librarian. Please stay alive long enough to find her. If you are a mother reading this, and you have already done this work, already caught your kid, already said "there you are," already walked them into school on the first day, already fought the fight at the PTA meeting and the phone call with the principal and the dinner table conversation with your own parents who don't quite understand. Please know that your kid will remember you for the rest of their life. Please know that the door that wasn't locked that one afternoon in October, that one single moment when you walked in and saw them and chose to be gentle, will be the hinge on which their entire life swings open. Please know that what you did was the most important thing you have ever done, more important than anything else, and that even on the days when you are tired and don't know if you did it right, you did it right. You saw your child. You held them up. You set them down gently in the direction of themselves. I am sitting in my apartment now, in the late afternoon, in the green dress I wore to lunch with my father last weekend, in the lavender scarf that I still keep on the corner of the mirror. I am writing this story because the leaves have started turning again. The light is slanting in again. It's early October, and the air has that particular slant to it that takes you back to the moments that formed you. I am writing this story because I want it to exist in the world. I am writing this story because I want someone, somewhere, in the middle of their own quiet afternoon, to read it and feel less alone. I am writing this story because I want my mother to know that I remember. I remember the day. I remember the door. I remember the outfit. I remember the wig. I remember the way the lavender scarf felt around my neck. I remember the 3 words. I remember the chair at the desk. I remember how she sat on the edge of the bed and put her arm around me. I remember how she told my father, and how my father took time but came around. I remember the counselor. I remember Dr. Marquez. I remember them all. I remember the first day of junior year. I remember Marianne. I remember senior prom. I remember graduation. I remember the first apartment of my own, and the first job, and the first time I introduced myself to a stranger in a coffee shop by the name my mother wrote down in a small notebook she kept in her purse. I am writing this story because my mother made it permanent. Because what she did on that October afternoon was paint a small room inside me, and she wallpapered it with lavender, and she put a soft chair in the corner, and a mirror on one wall, and a small lamp on a side table, and she left the door unlocked. And she still, every day, leaves that door unlocked. She sends me texts that just say, "I love you, sweetheart." She sends me photos of her garden. She calls me on Sunday afternoons. She remembers my doctor appointments. She asks me what my pronouns are using these days, even now, even though they've been the same for years, because she wants to make sure she never assumes. She has become a kind of fairy godmother for the kids in her community, and she tells them, when they come out to her, what my mother told me. There you are. She tells them, I love you. She tells them, I'm not going anywhere. And that is how a single afternoon can become permanent. Not because of what was worn, not because of what was said, not because of any dramatic gesture, but because of what came after. Because my mother came in and saw me and decided in that moment that she was going to stay. She was going to learn. She was going to ask gentle questions. She was going to say the new name in a whisper at the breakfast table. She was going to hold my arm when I cried. She was going to walk me into school on the first day. She was going to call the principal when it was necessary. She was going to defend me at the pharmacy. She was going to introduce me as her daughter, with the naturalness of someone saying the sky is blue, like it was always true. She was going to be the parent she always was, except now with one more piece of me included. And that is the most permanent thing. Not the dress, not the name, not the pronouns. The love that grows on the other side of the moment when everything could have gone wrong and didn't. The love that walks you into the school like it's nothing. The love that takes you shopping like it's nothing. The love that defends you at the pharmacy like it's nothing. The love that doesn't make a fuss because it doesn't need to. The love that just stays. That is the love my mother gave me. That is the love she made permanent. That is the love I carry with me every afternoon into every room I walk into. That is the love I will pass on eventually to my own kids or my own nieces or nephews or to the kids at the hospital where I volunteer on weekends who come to me with their own bags under their own beds, their own names in their own mirrors, their own doors they think are locked. I tell them what my mother told me. I tell them there you are. I tell them I love you. I tell them I'm not going anywhere. And I leave the door unlocked.